Of course. Wow. So then, and then, did he have other experiences too that he shared with you?
He was given a mission that I describe a little bit in the book, but he was given a mission when he came back. He was told that, his work's not done, he has more to do, and his mission, he believed, was that he was to pray for sinners. He said, because nothing is more terrifying to him than somebody being condemned to hell and losing God forever. So his mission when he came back, because the heart attack that he had suffered really made his heart weak, he couldn't go back to work and things like that. He prayed constantly. He prayed constantly for the conversion of sinners. So that was his mission.
Amazing. And just a question. Prior to that, was he a practicing Christian? Or?
He was a Christian. He did a lot of work with the homeless through his church. But even he would say, I was a Christian. I did the best I could, but I could have always, looking at it from the light of heaven, I could have always done better.
Right.
But I mean, he was a good human being to begin with. He did a lot for people he never knew, and he met them, which was interesting. He said, I met people. He said, I met a homeless man that I'd given a $20 bill to, and he greeted me when he got to heaven. And he said, and I've completely forgotten about him.
Goodness gracious.
I don't think anything that you do that is good and kind and done for another person is forgotten or wasted. I really don't. He made that obvious, really.
Sure. So then, there's probably some other people too that come to mind besides Simon. I know he's one of the kind of like out of the stars of your book, but one of the stars. Yeah. Anyway, but there's some interesting people. Before we get to the poor fellow with the terrible vision of the other side of hell, tell us, and what other people come to mind? I know that there are a number of people. My questions here, and that also had stuff to say. Of course, there was James and Benny and others.
Right.
Tell us about some other experiences that are very memorable and very rich about the encounters with heaven and Jesus.
Well, James was another one because I didn't take care of the man very long, and he had a bad heart. He had decided he didn't want to be resuscitated at all. So we made him a DNR that evening. He had spoken to his wife on the phone earlier in the day, and then they made him a DNR that evening. But his heart, he started to tank a little bit. His blood pressure was dropping, his heart rate was changing. So I called his family to come in. And on their way, there was a big old accident on the loop coming into the city. And traffic was backed up forever. Anyway, so he died before they ended up getting there. But before this, he started talking to somebody at the foot of his bed, and I didn't see anybody. So I said, well, who are you talking to? And he looked at me like I had 10 heads, and he pointed to the foot of the bed, and he goes, well, Benny's sitting right there. And I'm like, okay, because I've seen it before, so I didn't, you don't squabble with stuff like that. So
yeah, sure.
I said, all right. So we watched him talking, just animated. He's laughing, and he's throwing his arms up in the air and things like that. And then later on, when I had to go back in and do his vital signs again, I said, well, it's good Benny's here to visit with you. And he goes, oh, he's gone now. He says, but it was just so good to see that boy. So he started to tank a little bit, and I called the family. Family didn't make it in, and he had passed before they got there, just like half an hour. So when they got in there, they were distraught, to say the least, and angry because some of the family members didn't realize that he had decided to make himself DNR. So they're screaming at me, why didn't you do anything? You should have brought him back, things like that. So I went and got his chart, and I came back in there, and I was showing them that he had written and signed his own DNR order, and this is what, your dad and your grandpa wanted. So anyway, they're starting to escalate, and so I stopped him, and I said, did your dad know anybody named Benny? And because he didn't tell me who Benny was. He just said Benny was there to visit. And they just all stopped in their tracks, and the wife looked at me and she goes, what did you say?
Yeah.
And I said, did he know anybody named Benny? And they were like, well, why would you ask that? And I said, because for about 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, Benny sat right here, and I tapped at the foot of the bed and had an animated conversation with your husband and your grandpa and your dad. Wow. And it turns out they told me, they said Benny was their grandson who was killed in a motorcycle accident several years prior. And they said they were so close and that he had never been the same because he missed him so much. And I said, well, he was here to get him ready to go to the other side. And so the whole attitude in the room changed completely. And then they started reminiscing and things. So I left the room and let them have their time alone and stuff. But even that was an interesting incident.
Sure was. I mean, I would say so. And then, just on this idea of glimpses of heaven, because I think that starts to happen. And I'm just wondering, do they see clouds? Do they just see radiant light before they're really dead?
Some people see angels. And I asked one man who kept watching stuff, and I said, well, honey, what do you see? And he's like, and I said, well, they're here now, and they were there for a little bit, and then they'd leave, and then they'd come back. And I said, well, the next time you see them, why don't you ask them who they are? And he looked at me, and he goes, I'm not going to ask them. They must be 7-8 feet tall. Oh. But they came in and out of the room. They came in and out of the room several times. But, he wasn't fearful of them. He was just like, almost like in awe. I'm not going to ask them what their name is or what they're doing.
What they're doing here.
Yeah.
Golly, it's funny. So they and did they talk? They just showed up. They were just there as a presence, or do they?
Oh no, they'll have full on conversations with either sometimes angels. We had one lady that saw Jesus. Other people have full on conversations with deceased loved ones. And it's a conversation because when I'll stand outside the room and I'd listen to them, and you'll hear them ask a question, and then they'll pause, and then they'll go, oh, okay, yeah. Well, what about da 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 da? And so they wait for a response. So it's a two-way conversation. I just can't hear the other side of the conversation. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. Amazing. So then, right. So now this poor fellow that saw a vision of hell. Tell me about him. Insofar as you can't, you don't violate confidentiality. Okay.
Yeah. Well, he was very interesting because he was the kindest, most jovial man you'd ever meet, and always beamed a smile. But when I was talking to him, and we had brought him into the unit because he had metastatic prostate cancer and hadn't been able to pee for a while, so we had to put a catheter in him.
Yeah.
And so we were talking, and I was talking to him and getting his history and a little bit of the meds he was on and different nursing things.
Yeah.
And he told me that he had died before, basically. And so I asked him about it, and he goes, well, sure, I can tell you about it if you've got time to listen. So I grabbed a chair. But he was a patient that came back frequently. So he was a respite patient. So respites, they're allowed 5 days, just to give the family a break especially when they start getting, weaker and weaker and weaker. So he came in for 4 or 5 days once a month for probably 19 months. But anyway, he told me that he had died on the operating table during open heart surgery. And he was he described himself as a loudmouth atheist.
Wow.
Which he wasn't raised. At that time he wasn't raised that way. He was raised in a actually a Catholic home. But different things happened to him when he was growing up, and he just fell away. But his encounter was he came face to face with Jesus, and he said, I really didn't think there was anything after death. But anyway, his encounter was, he knew standing in front of Jesus when his life review started. He watched his life review and then would watch the expression on Jesus' face, and he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt where he was going, and that it was just, and that he's the one that told me that, God doesn't put us in hell. We put ourselves there, our actions and our denial and our disbelief and our, just flagrant throwing ourselves into sin.
Sure.
But he said when my life review was over, he said that, and the whole time Jesus was looking at him, and he said, but when my life review was over, he turned away from me and put his head down and put his gaze, Jesus's gaze went from him downward. And he said, and the thought of losing that and losing his presence for forever, he said, I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I threw myself at his feet and I begged for forgiveness. And he was ultimately forgiven, and Jesus told him, he said, but first, you're going to see what would have been your eternity this very day. And so 2 angels came, and he described going down through hell, which was terrifying. But even so, he was a completely changed man because of that encounter. Even his wife told me, she said, the man that you're seeing and talking to is not the man that went into surgery. She said, we were on the verge of divorce, and our marriage was kaput, basically. And she would cry, thinking, knowing that he's going to be dying soon. And she would just cry and say, I'm just not ready. I don't want to lose him yet. But his encounter was terrifying in detail. But Alan only would tell me so much. He wouldn't tell me the deeper levels, because he said that he described them as different levels of punishment.
Yeah.
And he would only go so far, and he wouldn't tell me anymore. And I asked him, I said, why not? And he explained to me, he said, I've been burdened with those memories for all these years, and I don't want to burden anybody else with them, because it just gets so bad that you don't need to hear it. You don't need to hear it, honey.
Wow.
So.
Holy smokes, huh? Maybe transformation. I guess he realized he lived a life where maybe for himself.
Yeah,
Self-centered,
exactly.
and all of a sudden realized, this is so horrendous. Why would I want to pass on such a terrible thing to shock their minds and imaginations? Wow. Now, were you with Alan when he passed away finally? I assume he passed away.
Yes, I was. God love him. Yeah.
Was he a new man then at that time too?
Well, his death was very peaceful. He just basically got sleepier and sleepier and sleepier. He had started to bleed again, things like that, and he just got, weaker and weaker and weaker. But I was there the night he died. It was absolutely peaceful, and he was in our unit for probably a total of 10 days before he died. The last admission that he came in with, and you never once, the whole time I took care of him, you never, ever, ever once heard him complain about everything. And we had to do some pretty awful things to him, but he never complained. He never lost his temper. He was never too tired to talk to somebody or to smile or to give somebody a kind word. So it definitely, from what his wife told us, he definitely was night and day different from that experience. So there's something to it,